Without further ado,
A really good Wordle first starting word.
Yes, it is. If you have a vowel, if you want the vowels, that's the one. So Luna's back.
Hey, Luna. Is anybody allergic to dogs and needs Luna not to be in the room? I'm happy to move her. Okay.
And so I would like to introduce our two presenters and we can get rolling. We have Tracy Lewis, class of 09, and Lindy Von Mudiet, who is class of 08. Yeah. And we really appreciate you both being here, and I will let you both take it away.
All right, thank you. So Tracy and I are going to share this mic, which is right here. Which is going to be exciting. This is fancy. I think it's going to mean that we're going to talk to this little pot.
Hello.
You said. So we have really brief introductions, but Tracy, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
I would like to say a little bit about myself. One, it's really awesome to be back here. I had sports in this class. A lot of memories of people getting goosed with ceiling torches and McDonald's coffee. So it comes back to me here. But yeah, Tracy, class of, I know so. So I was in the Firestone Stevens section. So anybody else who had that section, like, what up? And I love my experience here, and everything that I learned here, I have taken into my real life. And so I currently work as senior cabinet policy counsel at Citizen, which is a think tank and advocacy work. And I was going to keep it there because my bio's in the thing in GE, so that's how good. So that was really official legal language. I need you all to use that in your daily lives, and I'm going to kick it to Lindy.
All right. So, hello, I'm Lindy. I'm she, her pronouns.
Yeah, she, her pronouns. I forgot that. I'm sorry. Thank you.
I currently work at Harvard, which is a wild and woolly place to be all the time. We never have any problems with DEI. And we didn't just have a major scandal in January and October. And before that, I worked primarily, I began after graduation, my career clerking and then working for two law firms over 5 years out of law school. One was sort of a mid-sized regional firm in Philly. It was the 2008 recession, so I did a lot of awesome corporate bankruptcy law, which was the firm's version of letting me be an environmental lawyer. But I was glad they didn't lay me off, so there we go, success story. And then our practice group merged with a larger firm, Fox Rothschild. Stop. And so then I was part of a very large international firm and saw sort of the perspective of what it was like to practice law in that context. And then I went into lobbying for the German government. I'm half German, so I worked with the German government for 3 years in DC, doing a lot of renewable energy, tax credit lobbying, trade lobbying, some natural gas lobbying, for shame. And
yeah. Oh, I can't.
Back then it was a transition fuel. And so anyway, and then I was lucky enough to become sort of the deputy chief of staff at the Environmental Defense Fund, and that put me into a career path of nonprofit management in a way that allowed me to see a lot of DEI success and failures. And when Tracy asked me if I would help her out with this CLE today, I said, sure, we have some really great horror stories between the two of us that we can share. But in all seriousness, what we really wanted to do today was ground this both in our experiences, but also your experiences, because there are a lot of people who have degrees and expertise and decades of work expertise in DEI. Tracy and I are not those people. We are lawyers and policy people who have ended up, probably by virtue of our identities as women of color, but also by virtue of our ability to do the work, ended up in senior leadership positions where we've had to do a lot of DEI work. And so we want to really ground this CLE today in our lived experience, as well as some research that we can bring to this and give you all some strategies for what we've seen actually work well. So that we hope that you can take those strategies into your workplace in a variety of different contexts, from nonprofit to law firms of varying sizes. So that's roughly what we're going to do today. And we really want to spend the last half hour of this CLE in an open conversation so that you can bring some of your questions and experiences into this space. And we can even workshop and talk through some of those things together. So in this room, nobody is an expert and nobody is a novice, right? We're all a little bit of both. And so just embrace your spirit of curiosity today, and maybe a little bit of a sense of humor as well.
Definitely the sense of humor.
Because we're lawyers, let's define some things before we start our conversation. So these are, of course, not the definitive definitions. We're lawyers, right? We can always come up with better ones. But these are some definitions we're going to be working with based on the research we're drawing from. So this presentation draws from research from Harvard Business School, as well as a leadership course that they run for a lot of corporations, Fortune 50 to Fortune 100 corporations. It also draws on the definitions used in the Pew Research study that we're going to cite from. So this is the sort of like universe of definitions we're going to work with. And I have definitely been in meetings where people have used the terms equality and equity interchangeably, not realizing that those meant different things. So, and these are smart people. So these are deans, right? So I wanted to just start us off with these definitions. Diversity is really this idea that there are people from different backgrounds and experiences working on something together. And Harvard Business School has proven that if you have a diverse team, you actually make more money in your company. So you innovate more, you do a better job, you solve problems better. And so diversity is really important, but it can often be a dirty word, or a word that is misunderstood, or a word that gets tortured by certain presidential candidates. The word equity is not equality. The word equity implies that everybody has differences. And so the idea is to give equal access to people. It's sort of thinking about meeting those people where they are, rather than treating everybody the same way. And so my shorthand for that, when I had to explain it to this academic dean in the meeting we were having, was equality is saying, well, everybody is going to use just one bathroom, right? Everybody uses one bathroom, that's equality. Equity is saying, well, we have people from different backgrounds. We've got people who want to use a gender nonconforming bathroom. We've got people who, for whatever reason, need a bathroom that is specifically female and one that is specifically male in order to feel comfortable and happy in the space that we're creating for them. So we're going to have 3 bathrooms, right? And that's equity. It's sort of figuring out where somebody is and providing equal access to that person so they can feel comfortable in your space. And there are probably better examples that I can provide, but this is a good working definition that we've seen the Pew Charitable Trust use in their research. And then inclusion is sort of that touchy-feely piece. I guess it's all a little touchy-feely, but inclusion really speaks to how you make people feel in the workplace, how you value them. And that can show up in ways all across the workplace, from performance reviews, from hiring practices, from the way that you structure meetings and check-ins with members of your team. So to me, inclusion is actually the one that's the most difficult for us to achieve, because that is the one that is most subject to our implicit biases, right? To the natural favoritism we all feel. I certainly have a favorite employee on my team. I try really hard not to let that show, right? But it happens, and I mean, we're human beings, and this is a normal function of human beings and how our brains are structured, right? So this is not something to feel ashamed of, but it is something that, as a manager, as someone in a senior position in a workplace, you have to be, I think, the most on guard about. And so inclusion for me feels like that's the one that I wrestle with the most. Any questions on these definitions or any alternative definitions that anyone wants to bring into the space?
Well,
Ian.
not alternative, but just going on your bathroom thing, another thing that might make more sense is also you think about having an equal bathroom for everyone, but also having a handicapped version for someone like that.
Exactly.
Because that also gets you directly to ADA compliance as well.
Exactly.
Because it's like it may be equal, but some people just can't use for the equal facility that is geared towards the quote unquote normal or or able person.
Exactly. And thank you for bringing that into this conversation, because I think a lot of people, when I've been in DEI trainings, assume that diversity, equity, inclusion means race and ethnicity. And it certainly does not stop there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about people with different kinds of learning styles and my own teaching in a couple of slides. But thank you for bringing that into that space, because I think that's another like equality, equity issue.
I just feel it's a very good, easily understandable thing, because we all used to seeing like the handicap, stall in the bathroom.
So I guess it would be like,
I'm sorry, quick thing. Can everybody like introduce themselves?
Enoch's in the class of 2019 GD Mo. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Please.
I guess Mola, I'm just like, yeah, I'm a student of Social Justice program. So just a clarification, like equity would be 3 types of bathrooms, and equality would be like every bathroom has a handicap.
Exactly. That's a great way. See, I love being at a law school.
People are so smart. Lawyers. So I love it.
They're finding all the variations.
And you're listening, so thank you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or sort of thinking about these definitions or points of contention with them? It's very okay to be like, I disagree with your definition of inclusion. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's talk about the scope of what we want to do today. So when Tracy and I were thinking about this CLE, we really realized that like in our careers at this point, we are mid and senior level managers, we're directors, we're executive directors, right? So many of you in this room are directors of things, or you're high enough, you're maybe almost at the partner or partner level at a firm, you're high enough in a nonprofit where you have some organizational power. You may not have all of the organizational power. And where Tracy and I have always seen DEI fall apart in the organizations where we've worked is at that senior manager level. It's really hard to be told as a manager that you need to implement DEI initiatives and goals across your organization or your working group and not actually receive any training on it. And so we said, why don't we approach this problem from that conundrum we keep running into? Yeah, because we have been the managers who've been told, implement this. And then it's like, okay, but how? And I think, a lot of DEI consultants will come in and sort of run a day-long training. And most of that is to teach you that you're not doing things right. You walk out of that training and you go, but now what, right? How does this trickle to my team? How do I help my team to live this? And so that's what we really want to do here. And I really wanted to bring us to one sort of piece of research that I found very interesting, especially in the current political climate, where I hear a lot at Harvard from people like, oh, but we have to be careful because DEI is under attack right now. And that's actually not true. So more than half of the United States population, all across political spectrums and geographies, find that DEI practices in the workplace are a good thing, quote unquote. So it's just a little more than 50%. And then there's about 30% of the people who are sort of like, well, I don't have any strong opinion about it at all, which is curious, but we'll explore that later. And then there's a very small minority of people who think it's a bad thing. And I have one of our faculty in the government department at Harvard. He is like the guy that's always on CNBC talking about the debates and the polls. Oh. And he likes to say there's a third of every party, right? So you identify as Democrat, there's a third of the party that like Joe Biden could run over a kitten. And we'd be like, that's okay. He's Joe Biden, right? Like pro Biden. There's a third of the Republican Party that like Trump could run over a kitten and they'd be like, that kitten had it coming. God bless America. So like, there's always going to be a fraction of the population that is just like, this is a bad thing, or this is a good thing. And when I talked with him about this research, he said, yep, that kind of tracks along political lines, that 16%. We might even try to publish that soon. Anyway, so by and large, DEI is not considered to be a bad thing. It's considered to be a positive thing in the workplace. And so I think it's here to stay. It's going to be something that we're all going to have to wrestle with as managers in our careers. A couple more quick stats for you all. So there is a real divide in perception on DEI practices once you look at race, and Black and brown, people of color, BIPOC workers tend to feel that DEI isn't as strong as it could be in the workplace, or that companies are not doing enough and companies are paying too little attention. And that breaks down pretty much along ethnic lines and a little bit gender. So you see more women saying that not enough DEI in the workplace is happening, or my office isn't taking it seriously enough, than you see men saying that. But you see the most pronounced sort of difference in the perception of DEI in the workplace among Black and Hispanic workers. And then you also see it break a little bit along partisan lines, but really not in a way that is so significant. It tends to be more driven by age. So younger workers care more about DEI and are much more attuned to it. Older workers are a little more cautious and wary of it. And so if you have a workplace where you have those age divisions in your team, that's a really big thing for you all to be thinking about as well. And I'm sure that those of you who teach here notice that in your students versus your peers, or perhaps in your workplaces when you have interns or younger people on the staff. I certainly, there's a 20-year age difference between me and my most junior staff person.
Oh, well.
And so we have a lot of very open and difficult conversations about DEI in the workplace and DEI at Harvard, driven a lot by that age gap. So those are just a couple of sort of grounding statistics plus the definitions. Now I want to tell you a little story about the department I inherited. So my first job at Harvard was actually to run the sustainability graduate program at the Division of Continuing Education. And the Division of Continuing Education is the only school at Harvard that actually has a really robust master's program in sustainability. I was its first graduate. I did it right before I came here to VLGS. And I was working full-time for John Kerry. I wanted to take classes at night. Harvard had this cool new program. I decided to take those classes. I graduated. I came to law school. That program helped me to think about wanting to come to law school, in fact. And so I started teaching environmental justice in that program in 2019. And when the program director, who was the third white man to inhabit the role, pretty typical at Harvard, they recruited me to take over that department. And so I had a really interesting department that I inherited where 81% of the instructors in the program were white men over the age of 65. And half of them had terminal degrees, half of them did not, under a hiring guideline that said that terminal degrees can be replaced by work experience in some cases. But, sort of it was 50-50. 16% of the instructors were women. They were skewing younger. And 2 of the instructors identified as people of color out of 53 total instructors. And none identified as part of the LGBTQIA plus set of identities. So that was,
Maybe I just,
yeah, please.
quick point here. We're also talking about a school that is in the middle of a major metropolitan area that is more diverse than it used to be.
Yes.
People from all over the world. There's a large Caribbean population, Haitian population, so Spanish speakers, French speakers, who are all in the immediate area and the pool of applicants.
Mm-hmm.
It's a highly educated area.
Mm-hmm.
Yet
And there's a lot of competition for those jobs, right? There's a ton of places these people could teach instead of the Division of Continuing Education.
Yes, I didn't mean to interrupt, but this
No, it's
would
a
add that
great
layer.
point. And I mean, we'll skip, I have a little bit of humor as to so I'm a big Ted Lasso fan. And for those of you who are also Ted Lasso fans, there's a scene where two of the women are talking and one woman offers the other woman a job. And she said, don't give me a job just because I was nice to you in the bathroom yesterday. And she's like, why? That's what men do. They give each other jobs in toilets all the time. Right? And it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek way to talk about the fact that most of these instructors were hired because they had relationships with the 3 program directors, right? So the department grew from maybe 5 instructors to 53 because people hire people they trust and know. And a lot of the time, those are people that look and act like them and are in similar places in their careers. And so here I come. And I was like, that's odd that our instructors look like this because our student body does not, right? Our student body is majority female, minority white Caucasian. Almost half of the students live outside the United States, right? Because most of the classes are online. They speak a combined total of 23 different languages. 8% identify, and this is self-identification. So these statistics are not 100% as accurate as they could be potentially, but the students are pretty good about I think we have an 87% rate of self-identification. So 8% are LGBTQIA+, and the average age is almost 38. So it's a very different kind of program from the instructors. And so what I articulated to the instructors when I started was, look, guys, all of you guys, we need to make our instructors look more like our students. And we need to expand the curriculum to meet the needs of the student body. The curriculum hadn't been expanded in 6 years, which any of you who teach or in academic administration, that's probably not a good thing because the world of environmental policy and sustainability evolves very quickly. And so if you're still teaching the same courses that you were teaching in the early 2000s, you are not teaching the courses that the students need. So we went through a major curricular overhaul process. I did that in collaboration with the Kennedy School, the Business School, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and the School of Public Health, which was also the first time that the Division of Continuing Education had bothered to reach out to its sister schools and ask for advice. And so it was great. It brought a lot of goodwill, and we got actually the chance to recruit some of those professors to the Extension School. We doubled the number of classes in the curriculum in that 1 year. As a result, we also increased the diversity of our teaching staff. And sort of on the tail end of that process, the dean's office decided they would change that terminal degree can be replaced by experience hiring policy because they realized it was problematic in several other departments as well. And so they have, they kind of grandfathered in those people and created a new policy that everybody must have a terminal degree to teach at the Division of Continuing Education across all departments. That's still problematic though, because now you're gatekeeping in a way that you never kept before, and you're grandfathering in people who don't meet the bar. So yeah.
Can you explain what you mean by terminal degree?
Yeah, sorry. So a doctor of some kind, right? So a PhD, a JD, an MD. MBAs are considered terminal degrees at Harvard, but
Only 2 years.
yeah. Well, why? Whenever the HBS people get sassy with me, I'm just like, whatever. At least I have a JD. No, we like academic administration jokes. Anyway, so we did a lot to reshape the department, and it is now a much more diverse department. And I share this with you all only as a story to show that it's possible. And it's possible by doing some of the things I'm going to tell you to do in the next couple of slides. But it doesn't come without peril and turmoil. And it certainly doesn't come without needing to pay a lot of attention to onboarding, culture, and creating a different ecosystem where everybody still feels included. Because this 65-year-old white male instructor has a lot to offer the program, and we don't want to lose that or marginalize that person as we add a more diverse teaching staff. So the students are pretty happy and things are going really well. And because I did that work so collaboratively with the other schools, when they created an Institute for Climate and Sustainability at Harvard, poached me to be part of that.
Another trailblazing moment for you. So.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I wrote a memo and they were like, oh, we love this memo. Here's a job. Now do the things that you said you were that we should do that the university should do in the memo. So here I am, on the climate education committee for all of Harvard now, and really trying to bring that same energy from the Division of Continuing Education into, the rest of Harvard, which has a very different problem because tenured professors, it's harder to make changes in your instructor base when there's tenure involved. So it's just something that we're going to have to work on at Harvard for a while, especially in the climate and sustainability space, where predominantly the teachers are the professors, the faculty are mostly white men over the age of 50.
Can I ask you a question quickly here? Because you noted this earlier, how the nature of sustainability policy and education around us is a very rapidly evolving area of environmental work. Like the job that I do now, when I was in school, could not have even envisioned it because it didn't exist. And now it is well entrenched. You have an entire program around this.
Yeah.
And what are some of the challenges within rapidly evolving work that does call for new opinions because it's drawing from so many different areas that's coming head up against 20th century mode of thinking?
An old structure. Well, I'm so glad you said that, Tracy, because that's a segue to the next slide, which is that this is not just an issue in academic administration, right? This is not just an issue for those of us who teach environmental policy, law, and science. This is an issue in environmental nonprofits as well. I haven't even touched the corporate world or the law firm world with a poll in this because I didn't want to call anybody out here. But, again, we're grounding in our lived experience. But, Green 2.0 is an organization that has been working since 2017 to map diversity, equity, and inclusion in major environmental organizations. And they're at, I think, 104 now that they map every year. And, we've made some progress over the years, but very slow, very pretty lame progress, frankly. So there's a lot of work left to do to make sure the environmental movement looks like America, right? Like the environmental movement doesn't even look like American population statistics. Same thing with the students versus the instructors. It's like we have a movement of people that represent a very small fraction of the actual population of this country. And then we wonder why the environmental movement doesn't connect with a broader spectrum of people in the United States. And one of those reasons is because there's a disconnect in who's doing that work and how to do that work effectively. And that's a disconnect I ran into over the 8 years that I worked in environmental nonprofits. So I think this is something that, at Fox Rothschild, we had a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. We had some partners of color. They were very few and far between, but the firm was working on it in a way that was very different from the way that, the Sierra Club or the Environmental Defense Fund was working on this. So I think there's certainly some differences, but we hope that the strategies we're highlighting will be things that you can use in a law firm setting as well. So there's a lot of work to do. So the first strategy, and this was something that I'm going to share an example. This was a really intentional decision that we made at Sierra Club when I was chief of staff to adjust job descriptions to become more inclusive to people of differing educational backgrounds. We did an audit of our job descriptions and we realized that we didn't have any jobs at the Sierra Club that were available to people who didn't have a college degree. And that didn't feel like it reflected the reality of the actual skills required for the job. And so we did what a lot of other companies have been doing, which is sort of thinking about how to fill a skills gap and make, increase diversity by being more accurate in the skills listed as a job requirement. And so this is still something that senior managers, ironically, in corporate environments are really resistant to doing. And I think there's something in our culture that values a bachelor's degree and that puts somebody with a bachelor's degree automatically above someone who doesn't have that. And that's a cultural thing, right? It hasn't actually been proven. It doesn't bear out in terms of like worker efficiency, profitability, or any of the other metrics. And there's a great Harvard Business School study that I am happy to share with anybody who wants to dig into that more. But what we did at Sierra Club was we essentially looked at the fact that, first of all, we can't do this for every job, right? The Sierra Club legal team, they need people with JDs who pass the bar, right? Who can go litigate cases. But does the social media team, do they need bachelor's degrees? Like, do you learn how to do social media well in college? Most people who are social media influencers didn't learn that skill in college. Subject matter contractors, people who are really experts at, a good example was wind energy, maintenance infrastructure. We had a couple of contractors advising the policy team on that. They're tradespeople, right? They have gone to a different set of schools. So making college degree a threshold for those contractors weeded out a lot of diverse candidates. Where skills can actually be taught by the manager instead of learned in college is another great place to do this. So I recently hired at Harvard an intern who doesn't have a college degree. We're now turning her position into a full-time staff position. She doesn't need to go to college to learn how to use Outlook calendar and Excel and Word. Those are all things we can teach and that we've been teaching, right? So a lot of the skills that she uses every day in her work life don't require a college degree. And I hope that one day she decides to go to college, but she's an amazing employee. And so writing a job description that is tailored around her skills, not her educational background, is what is actually much more valuable. So this is a way that I think the sort of final step here is to what we did at Sierra Club was we wrote a set of template job descriptions where we could just plug in the educational requirements based on the salary and pay grade. And so then it was truly blind in the sense that one team couldn't have a different set of job descriptions than another team, right? It was standardized across the organization, which when you think about an organization with, at that time, it had 1,200 staff, no small task, but very worthwhile. And we actually ended up seeing within just 2 years, a really strong increase in people who didn't have a college degree, but who were doing an excellent job in their new roles. So that's sort of strategy number one is if you have the ability in your workplace to take a look at how you write your job descriptions and whether you're whether you're driving the job description based on skills or whether you're driving it based on education, that's a great place to think about increasing your diversity in your organization. Yeah.
I'm Patrick Kennedy. I'm class of '93, also on the board of trustees and the VLGSAA board with Tracy. It's interesting to me, and I haven't had any deep thoughts about the specifics that you're presenting here, but it's interesting to me that this, on its surface, eliminating the college degree and targeting the job description around the skill set seems to be inconsistent with what you did at Harvard Extension School, where the terminal degree was required in order to increase diversity among the teaching staff. So I'm interested whether you've thought about the distinctions there and how they jive or don't jive together.
I was very upset by the Extension School's shift in requirement. I understood why they did it because they had a tough situation in one of the other programs where people had kind of been hired without being vetted by a former program director. But I fought that because I said in the environmental field, we really do need to lean into your experience is actually more valuable than a terminal degree in some of these scenarios. So someone who got a PhD in 2003 in remote sensing is not as good of an instructor as somebody who has been working in remote sensing and maybe has a master's degree for just like the last 5 years, because there's been a quantum leap in that science that the person who's done the PhD, the PhD doesn't mean they've been keeping up with the field in the same way as the person who's currently working in the field. And so I pushed back hard against that. And my academic dean was very understanding actually of the pushback. And it was a little bit of fighting around specific instructors I was trying to hire, maybe like 8 of them, I think, where they said, oh, are you sure you can't find someone with a PhD who does that? I'm like, no, this is the person, right? This is the person that, Ford is hiring to do this part of their sustainability plan. So we need to hire them to teach our students. But I think in something like the the government department or the history department, they wanted this rule, that terminal degree rule, because they actually wanted to stop having people hiring like friends and research fellows and things like that. So I think that's a great point that you're making. And I actually will say that in the rest of Harvard, when I started working at the Slaughter Institute, I realized that the rest of Harvard had done this process. And so we actually have a very strong, I think it's around 25% of the Harvard workforce doesn't have a college degree. And I'm actually really proud of Harvard for doing that, because I think that has actually been a very smart move on their part to make sure that people who live and work, who are from the Boston area, can work at Harvard in some of these roles, right?
Exactly. That's kind of goes back to my earlier question of looking at places where you are and the people who live there and their abilities. So, for example, here in Royalton, we come from all over, but the people who work here, the staff, they're drawn from the community and they've been here for years. And we made it difficult if we required a college degree to be a groundskeeper or a law degree. Well, who would work here? And yes, this is an area that is, Vermont is a white state, but it's also very rural. And there are people who do not have access to higher ed. But should they be limited from earning pay and take care of their family, putting food on the table? So,
and really contributing back to the law school, right? 100%. I mean, I think like some of our favorite folks that we interacted with when we were students were people who were from the community and could actually like be support for us as students who knew what it was like to live here and who could tell us where the good restaurants were. And like, right? It's like, I think academic institutions are actually better at this than nonprofits and corporates are. And again, certainly if you're hiring a law firm associate, it's an educational requirement, right? But if you're hiring a legal secretary or somebody to work in the mailroom in your law firm, and you have the power to think through that to make your firm more diverse, I would recommend that you try to do that, because it's a really good way to add an element of sort of also educational and probably class diversity to your workforce. That is really helpful.
So I know we have 15 minutes left.
No, we have a little more.
Oh, we do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Keep talking. We have another half an hour, but we're gonna go through these a little faster.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the next sort of strategy is rethinking your interviews. So when I was at Sierra Club, the head of the legal team became very ill and had to take a 10-month leave of absence. And so I became the head of the legal team for those 10 months, in the sense that I did all the administrative work of the team, and the senior attorneys took over the sort of litigation content piece. And we would meet and manage the department together. And so one of the things I did while I was, that was a team that had, I think, 2 people of color on it across the entire country. And the excuse that I was always told was, well, that's because, people don't want to come work for a nonprofit, and we're a 501c4, and we don't, you can't get your student loans forgiven if you work at a C4. So that's why people of color don't want to come work here as lawyers. And I was like, that sounds insane, and not like a real excuse. So I asked them, I said, can I sit in on a couple of your upcoming interviews? And what I observed when I sat in was this quote, right? So there was an applicant who was top of his class from Stanford Law, African-American, and they said, well, he's so great, but will he really be able to work in, Wyoming on the coal litigation? And it's like, yes, he will, because he's a really good lawyer. And you as a manager are actually responsible for making sure that he feels comfortable in that role. That's the inclusion part of your job, right? That's the inclusion part of DEI. And so we started to structure the interviews differently for the legal secretaries and the junior attorneys we were hiring around making sure that each interview had a more diverse composition of people and also represented some of the clients that this person would interact with. So they could also give more informed feedback, and it wasn't just a bunch of senior attorneys going, gee, I wonder, and having their own biases inform the hiring processes. And I think we did a much better job. That second class, that incoming class was much more diverse as a result of those changes we made in the interview process. So this is, again, another way where managers really have to challenge themselves to think differently. But it's a really effective way to intervene in the hiring process to increase diversity. And I think one of the other things that I've noticed in my own team at Salata, we have my peer senior manager who runs the other half of the Institute. His version of interviews is sort of to have a conversation with someone. There's no standard questions. So I said, how about we stop doing that? Because everyone you hire looks the same. And how about we bring in some actual standard questions that we're going to ask every candidate, and we make the interview process exactly the same for every candidate we interview. And then at the end, we have anonymous feedback so that it's not just a little conversation in the hallway with someone like, oh, did you like that candidate? What did you like about him? Of people who might share the same identity and way of thinking and educational background, but that we can look at a spreadsheet and say, okay, these are the scores for this candidate from the interview team, which is a diverse team across the spectrum of the Institute. Interesting. The candidate we didn't know about really actually scored better than all the other ones. And so we have actually found that to be a really effective strategy for rethinking our hiring process. And we worked really closely with HR on that. And that's been really effective for us. And, this is a little bit blunt, but I think sometimes when managers say things like, well, I'm not sure if this person's a good fit, it's sort of like, don't let that be code for you being a lazy manager, right? Fit is your job. Fit is not the candidate's job. Fit is your job. It's your job to manage a team, and it's your job to look out for the processes that assure equity and inclusion in your team. Onboarding. Onboarding is critical. How many of you started a job where you didn't get any onboarding? Like almost every job I've ever had. My onboarding at Harvard was, here's your laptop. And I was like, okay, cool. So, but it didn't surprise me because the nonprofit world is like that. EDF was like that. TPL was like that. Sierra Club was like that. The only place I ever actually got proper onboarding was Fox Rothschild, where they have like a week of courses for you to take about the firm's culture and history and practice group. And they were like very serious about their onboarding.
Wait, can I share a quick onboarding?
Please share.
So Regine and I worked at the DOJ.
Oh God,
as
yes.
Contractors. And my day one, it's a long process to get hired for the federal government. And the hiring director, he approved me, he interviewed me, and I showed up on my first day, and the secretary was like, oh, hi, so-and-so, Tracy's here, and he was sitting at his desk typing. I do not have time for this. I do not. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, you know what? My very dear friend is here. She can help me. You don't have to worry about it. I was like, just follow me. So I followed him to my desk where there's no computer, no phone, no nothing. And I'm just like, so I take off my coat because it was February, and I turned around and he was gone. And he never spoke to me again. Regine, is this true? But the wildest thing is how wonderful it was to have a dear classmate there who was like, it's okay, Tracy, don't lose it. I will help you. I'll tell you what's going on. Because I don't know what I would have done had Regine not been there. Absolutely. Yeah. That's the God's honest truth. So that's my onboarding horror story. Thank you for listening.
That scenario has come up at interviews for me too. Like, have you had a difficult
manager incident or just like
Scott, yes, that was the one. So yeah, those are really as a Black person, right? I didn't even know like how to interpret that. Like this is like I saw my coat on. Like what do? I had gone through this long process. And I really wanted to turn on my heel and leave, but I was like, wow, I'm at the DOJ. Like this could turn into something. And I mean, yeah, I'll never work for the federal government again, probably because that's behavior is allowed. And also, yeah, made me feel extremely alienated and having a manager who refused to speak to me from day one. Like, how do you function in a place like that and feel inclusion? It was out the window.
Yeah.
So sorry.
And probably also equity, because how are you going to thrive and be successful in an environment where you don't even know what the expectations are for you on your first day of work?
They never communicated it at all.
Yeah. So, one of the key things that you this is probably the most important of all the strategies is be good at onboarding. And there are a lot of amazing resources out there. LinkedIn has teaching modules on how to do onboarding well as a manager. There's articles, there's books written about it. I'm happy to recommend any and all of those things to anybody who's sort of scratching their head and going, I need help with this. But put some thought into your onboarding. And then also, this is like I always call it over onboard people, right? Like suffocate them with helicopter parenting in their first week on the job. But I know it's hard because we're all really, really busy, and it's really, it takes as much time to delegate work as it takes to do the work, I always say. So onboarding is really hard for a manager. It takes time, but it's really, really important. And then the other thing that I can recommend as part of really strong onboarding, and this is, again, something we did at the Trust for Public Land that helped a lot from one year to the next in our employee satisfaction survey, especially among the younger employees of color at TPL, was to really standardize skills training for all employees, so that different categories of employees don't feel like they're being targeted for certain kinds of training. We made everybody sit through, like, how do you use this tool? How do you, what's the best way to make a spreadsheet? Shockingly, a lot of people who've been using Excel for decades in their career were like, I learned something new today, because who among us really knows how to use Excel? I went to law school, so I didn't have to do a lot of math.
Don't do that.
But anyway, and then I became a bankruptcy lawyer. So the joke was on me. I did a lot of math in my head in the hallways settling cases. But if you can standardize the skills training for your employees and think about how to do that across different employee categories, that's also a really effective way to include equity and inclusion in your sort of goals and work plan. And then this is, again, as I was joking earlier, I have a favorite employee, but, and I naturally want to go
recorded because
exactly. They're going to be like, which of us is it? But it's a small enough team. They know. But I have to be really thoughtful that that employee doesn't get more time with me in one-on-one check-ins, that every employee gets a performance review from me. My boss is a vice provost at Harvard. He has no time to do my performance review, but I made him do one anyway. So I was like, we have to check this box. You cannot have a woman of color working for you and not do a performance review. I'm not going to let you get away with that. And he, we had a great time. It was good. But the guys that I worked with at the extension school, they said to me, are we really doing a performance review? Because when Jim was in charge of the department, we just would go out for beers. Literally what they said to me. And I was like, okay, well, Jim is not the boss anymore. So now we're going to do a performance review, and we're going to talk about your goals for the year. And we're going to talk about why you're doing your work the way you're doing it. So these kinds of little things, they matter in terms of setting an equitable and inclusive work culture. And as managers, you cannot forget that part. It's your job you are where the rubber meets the road on equity. And that kind of leads me into sort of the transparent management. One of the big things that I saw at EDF and Sierra Club that would always go wrong was that managers would rely on affinity groups, staff affinity groups, to do the work that they should have done in their teams. Having those tough conversations, providing open space for disagreement. I just finished reading a great book by Charles Duhigg that I can recommend to everybody called Super Communicators. And it talks about how the culture of Netflix broke down when one of their senior executives used the N-word publicly in an all-staff meeting. And it caused about 2 years of like people leaving and drama and lawsuits in the Netflix culture. And the work they did to repair their culture has now been sort of cited as a case of successful workplace transformation. It really wasn't that challenging. When you read the book Super Communicators, you learn that what it is that they started to have a series of conversations within smaller teams of people where it was a safe and open space for people to go, you know what, I really don't understand what a land acknowledgement is. Can somebody explain that to me? And somebody would. And so having a safe space for confusion, disagreement, and education is really, really key. And again, as a manager, you have the ability to provide that for your employees. And again, many studies will tell you that that's a great way to push inclusion and equity in the workplace, but it's an overlooked strategy so often. It is your job to coach and mentor people who don't look like you. That's something that law firm partners often forget. And it's one of the reasons where if you look at research on why, women and people of color aren't making partner as much, it's because people coach people that they like and that they can relate easily to. They don't work as hard to coach people that are different from them. So I think in the law firm context, this was a really important piece that Fox Rothschild was trying to change in its work culture. We were assigned partner mentors who were not us and who came from different backgrounds so that we could start to get to know partners from other offices and other parts of the country and other practice groups. And that was really effective actually in helping associates to feel like they had a chance to grow into their careers there. The last strategy is the teachable moments. So there's going to be a lot of mistakes and hiccups along the way. Investing some of your budget into training that is ongoing, not just like, today we're going to do our annual diversity day training. Done, check. Now we can all move on. I would rather see a manager decide to do 6 2-hour-long trainings instead of a 1-day big expensive training day. Because actually, and again, if you look at the case study of Netflix and some other larger corporations, Harvard Business School goes into this in exhaustive detail on their website. I can share those cases with you. Those consistent trainings are much more effective over the long term in creating an equitable and inclusive workplace than the sort of one and done diversity day kind of training model. And I think a lot of small businesses struggle with that because you have so much to worry about. And so worrying about ongoing training around diversity, equity, inclusion, it's kind of probably at the low end of your list. But if you're truly committed to a more diverse workforce and an inclusive workforce, this is really important. One of the best trainings I ever got at Harvard was half a day on working with students who have disabilities, how to talk about their different abilities, how to teach their different abilities to their different abilities, how to use part of your class time to figure out if everybody's still with you, right? Those kinds of things, how to create your class website and your class syllabus and your class materials so that they can be accessible to people who are using a screen reader or a recorder or some kind of note-taking tool to just understand your class. So I look like a pretty diverse person. I like to think I am, but I don't really know very much about people who are neurodivergent, except that, I have a little brother who is neurodivergent. And I know what works for him. That is not the same thing as what works for my other students. And so I love that Harvard pushes these trainings at me once a month. And many of them are optional, but many of them are also required. And it's really, really great to have that infrastructure. And if you don't have that in your workplace, I encourage you to think about whether you can help bring that into your workplace and be a leader in that way. And then, let's get rid of the sort of LGBTQ appreciation night. That was something that I did at EDF and Sierra Club because I had the positional authority to do that. But employees kept telling me that they felt really marginalized by that kind of thing, because it was sort of like, we're on display for one night only. It's like, no. So I think also just thinking about how you value and honor diversity in the workplace, how you recognize it, and letting employees who identify with that identity be the ones who lead the recognition effort or help shape it is really important. And again, we as managers, we try to think like, okay, we know what to do. We're going to try to do this really good thing. And we don't actually often take the time to ask the people who have that identity or who are affected and impacted by that behavior what they think about that. So just that simple step is something that I think you can do to be really a little more effective in the inclusion and equity piece of the DEI work stream. And then the last slide I just want to share is sort of my own personal soapbox, which is the pipeline. So
No. The ecosystem.
the ecosystem.
You don't want to encourage pipelines.
That's right. No more fossil fuel jargon. I love that. I had to stop saying now I'm cooking with gas. I had to start being like, I'm cooking with solar. Yeah, so the ecosystem. So we know, right? Whether it's a law firm, whether it's environmental nonprofit, or whether it's academia, we know. If you look in this room right now, right, we know that we have an issue with people of color not entering our field in the first place. And recruiting people of color to be in our field is a challenge. And so there are some organizations that are doing that intentionally and trying to create opportunities for young people of color to get placed in internships and jobs in environmental movement. And so I'm really happy to lift up 2 of those organizations and 3 of the interns that I have on my team now. One is through an organization called Year Up, which takes people from the lowest income parts of Boston and gives them a 6-month skills training and then places them in various corporations and institutions around the Boston area. Harvard really supports Year Up, and so we were really lucky to be able to get a Year Up intern. This is the intern who is going to become a permanent person on our staff in a few weeks. And then there's a new organization, relatively new, called Black Girl Environmentalists that has also been trying to do a lot of work to get young Black women excited at the college level and the high school level to pursue environmental careers and not see themselves as locked out of those careers. And so they kicked off a fellowship program this year, and they were pretty desperate to find organizations that would host a fellow. That was a really big struggle for them. And so the head of the organization reached out to me and said, would you consider one of the fellows, perhaps? Because if Harvard does it, then we think other people will want to do it too. And I said, give me 2 fellows. Give me 2, because if Harvard has 2 fellows, then it'll be easy for everyone to have 1. And in fact, it was really good PR, social media PR for Harvard. So the HR department was happy with me, but never a bad thing. But actually, you know, it was true. Once we said Harvard is going to host 2 Black Girl Environmentalist fellows, suddenly there were, 20 organizations who wanted a fellow. Wow. Because Harvard brings a certain amount of brand and trust and credibility, I suppose, in the marketplace of the world. So work on the pipeline. It's not really a strategy. It's the ecosystem. That's right. The ecosystem.
See, we have to train ourselves to think differently.
They've been brainwashing us. So with that kind of concludes our little strategies shtick.
Yes.
We would love to just open it up to your thoughts and questions, maybe your horror stories, your ask us anything advice. We're happy to be your Roxanne Gay for the next 15 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, here and then there.
Yeah, my name's Helen Combs. I'm a alum from 2016. I manage a team in Europe. I guess my question is.
Oh yeah, wow. A whole nother kettle of fish over there.
Any tips on getting higher management or HR on board with some of these strategies?
Is your higher management or HR based in Europe? Are they Europeans?
Yes.
What
Not all of
country
them.
are they from?
There's France, there's UK, not all of them. Problem is HR teams in each country. But
Yeah.
US team is not answering me, so.
Okay, I would say work on the US team first. So we are way better at this, right? I mean, I worked for the German government for 3 years. I was certainly the only person of color who worked for the German government for all 3 of those years, in the entire United States. And that is all of us, like 100 or so employees. I was the only person of color. And that is because they hire Germans. So there's a diversity problem based on, right, based on the composition of the country itself. But yeah, I think that DEI in Europe is it's a much more challenging topic. They are not anywhere close to where we are in the United States. So like, I feel for you, and I'm happy to like offline talk about some things, but I would say start with the US team, and think about how do you have a relationship with your manager who is bought into this?
The problem is manager is French, so.
Oh, you definitely have.
This is the challenge. Okay. Do you get to manage your own team?
Yes,
Can you be a model?
I can try, but budgets are always a problem.
Yeah, I know that. I know that well. That was the EDF conundrum as well. EDF always used to default onto budgets as the reason why they couldn't do diversity work. And that's also not true. But my only answer for you is start working on your own manager and use some of those Pew statistics about, does your office do some kind of like a workplace employee engagement survey? Okay, so scour that and find a weakness and talk about that and offer to help fix that weakness. Managers love that. And that's one of the ways that actually I was able to make some progress at EDF was to say, look at this, look at these numbers for some parts of our staff. They're appalling and embarrassing. And Green 2.0 is about to call us out on this. Why don't we get with the program? That's my best advice. But I'm sorry that you're dealing with that, and I'll give you my email. Thanks. I think we had that and then another question behind. So the woman with the glasses and then. Yeah.
Amanda Lyon, LLM 2014. My horror story before my question is the thing I hate the most is being in hiring panels where they say he has really good executive presence, which is just code language for the fit, right? Like he's the right fit. He looks good in a tie and a suit. So we can put him in any boardroom and our clients will inherently start asking him questions regardless whoever's in the room, right? And so that is my least favorite vernacular whenever we're in performance reviews. Executive presence drives me nuts. And I guess my question is like knowing who is in charge, and it's kind of along this line, like how do you even start that conversation so they're open and not reactive and feeling scarce in their own roles or who they're going to be reflected in coming up behind them?
Great question. I can take a stab at this, but Tracy, I don't know if you have some thoughts as well.
You start now.
Okay. So one of the things that I've learned is that it's really important to meet senior managers where they are, not where you want them to be, which is really hard and takes patience. So the woman who is about to retire as CEO of the Trust for Public Land, I worked for her when she was the vice president of EDF as well. And over the decade of our friendship and working relationship, I have seen her go from somebody who said things to me when I worked for her at EDF, like, well, you should just be happy that they invited you to that meeting, to somebody who has envisioned and then found the funding for and blazed the path to have TPL be the only organization that is working with Indigenous communities on land back programs. So she has made a huge transformation in 10 years. And it shouldn't take that long, but it might. And I think that the thing, she and I talk a lot about the transition she's made in her own thinking as an executive leader. And one of the things she says to me is that, she's grateful for the fact that I kept like poking at her, but not making her feel like she was a terrible person. I think there's a lot of DEI consulting that happens in the world where a consultant will come in for the day, sit a bunch of mostly white managers down in a room and tell them they're racist. And everybody walks out feeling really bad about themselves. And they might be a little racist. That might be true. But is that effective? Or is that just going to get people to shut you out, right? And it gets people to shut you out. And so what I found to be more effective is one-on-one conversations with senior managers where you can say, hey, I'm noticing that your team's composition looks like X, and I'm wondering if you've been struggling with trying to bring diversity in. I'd love to help you if you're struggling with that. Like if you think it's a problem, I would love to help you with that. And you would be surprised how many times I've heard a positive response to that question, to an offer of help, to sort of I'm here with you.
Solutions oriented.
Yeah.
Rather than
shaming. So like most things we try to convince people to do, whether to not use as much fossil fuel or to like hire people of color, shaming doesn't really work. So that's my advice.
Yeah, I will stick with that. We have a question in the back.
Yeah. I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, we probably have time for one more.
Okay.
question.
I'll be brief. David Royer, class of 94, JD. I was just really following up on the last two comments and help in getting you to where you need to be. I've been in-house corporate counsel for a number of years, including for a French-German company. So I know of what you speak. I think your employee relations manager and your chief compliance officer can also be really big aids. And not to sound terribly cynical, but one of the ways that we got DEI introduced at the company I worked at and trying to convince our parent companies, French and German, to allow us to move that forward was simply from a compliance perspective, saying, you know what, this is going to cost you in the long run if you don't do this.
Yep.
And when you bring it to their attention that not only is it good for business, but it actually may save you from being on the wrong end of a lawsuit, they really listen up very quickly.
I love that. I will tell you a funny horror story to end this, which is when I was working at the Federal Ministry of Economics as a lobbyist, because I was the only person in the office with a JD, I was also the legal officer for all of the American. Yeah. And so it was my job to make sure we did some of the compliance things around the lobbying disclosures and other employee disclosures. And I worked with our operations person. We didn't really have an HR person. That person was in Berlin and was like, whatever, hire a law firm if you guys get sued. So we had, I call it Bikini Gate. So German men, workplace culture in Germany, you are allowed to put up a bikini model calendar in the workroom in a German office, right? That's not illegal.
In the 21st century?
Oh yeah. So there's a German company that manufactures chainsaws and other kinds of construction materials. And every year they come out with a steel calendar, which is sort of like the Playboy swimsuit issue for German men. So the German men in our office were like, the steel calendar is out. We'll put it up. And all the American women in the office were like, no, no, no. And so it was my job to mediate that situation because I was the lawyer in the office. And so to your point, yes, the compliance person is sometimes your best friend because they can be like, that's a lawsuit. But it was also a great teachable moment where I could say to everybody, and Germans are very blunt and frank, so this was a fun conversation, but I was like, no. And they were like, can we put it up in the men's bathroom? And I was like, also no. And I was like, you can put it up in your bathroom at your house if your wife lets you. So that's the only, not in the office at all. No part of the office can have this bikini calendar. Second, why don't we use this as an opportunity to have a little 2-hour session on sort of American workplace culture and differences that we might observe. And it was actually a really nice way to get everybody to do some implicit bias training that I snuck in there as well. And so it became a really good teachable moment for the whole office that started with a tragedy, but ended with a good teachable moment. So I thank you for bringing that into this space, because I think when you have those kinds of cultural differences too, it's a real challenge to navigate some of that. And yeah, the lowly compliance person in your office can be your best friend.
But I want to say in closing, thank you all so much. Really appreciate your participation and your energy and going along with our crazy jokes.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
And letting us have a dog in the room.
Yes, that too. So thank you.
Thank you so much.